In my mind, the chronology of the event is hazy, but I do remember that the day of the week started with a T, and it was dark. So it was a Tuesday or a Thursday night that depression first changed my life. I come from a passive-aggressive family, the type of family that, during my childhood, communicated anger through Post-it notes and pursed lips. We did not have certain conversations. It was not a despotic or overly conservative home. I believe that my parents were relatively open-minded in their own way, but we were too concerned with happiness to discuss pain. Conversations about sadness felt like failures. Fake joy seemed better than grief. So when my mom moved out of our house on Christmas Eve one year, we didn't have the conversational or emotional tools to process our feelings. My parents had been discussing divorce, but the concept still seemed abstract and tangible, like freedom or poetry. It was still a theory in our minds, and we were not prepared to test it. The reasons for the relocation and eventual divorce were never truly revealed, and certain things are still unclear. But I sensed that my mom's departure was fueled by a deep melancholy, a belief that things were not healthy, resulting in a desperate attempt to find something better. When my mom returned to my house the following day, it was awkward. My mom and dad were together on December 25th, pretending as though nothing was different. My parents exchanged ties and candles as usual, and I watched with annoyed fascination as my sister, for the 7th year in a row, correctly guessed what I'd bought for her. My mom, her smile somehow sadder than it had ever been before, still made breakfast casserole and watched proudly as we opened our gifts. No one said anything important that day. Weeks passed, during which my mother grew more distant. My mom had found a one-bedroom apartment about 5 minutes from our house. I rarely visited my mom's place. It was nice, but despite what I imagined were sincere and even desperate attempts to make it seem cozy, it seemed lifeless. To me, it had the eternal decor equivalent of frosted angel food cake, little more than sugar-coated fluff. When I first visited my mom's apartment, she gave me a tour. She showed me the pictures of my brother, my sister, and I that she had framed, and she showed me the couch that I could stay on when I visited. She was particularly proud of her porch. She told me that she had requested a first-floor apartment because she wanted to be able to feed the geese. Her parents, my grandma and grandpa, had always loved to feed animals, and the small pond behind her one-bedroom apartment reminded her of home. I didn't realize it then, but my mom was fighting vigorously, bravely against mental illness. I saw her pastel one-bedroom apartment as awkward second-rate kitsch, but to her, it was a sanctuary, her Alamo, her desperate attempt to exist in a world in which she felt lost. Of my many regrets, one of my biggest is that I didn't see my mother's struggle for what it was. I regret that I misinterpreted her fight against darkness as an act of selfishness. I regret that I didn't really talk to her then, not really. So, on that Tuesday or Thursday evening, my dad and I went to the artsy theater near our house to see The Kite Runner, the movie based on the Khaled Hosseini novel about the tension between guilt and redemption. As we exited the theater, my dad saw that he had a dozen missed calls and one voicemail message from my older brother. But because of bad service, he waited until we got home to check the message. In the voicemail, my brother told my dad that my mom had attempted suicide. She had purchased a helium tank weeks earlier, and while lying on that tan couch in her one-bedroom apartment, she tried to asphyxiate herself. The moments that followed are unclear. Despite several therapy-aided attempts to remember them, my mind places those memories in a dark, thick fog. Still, I remember telling my girlfriend at the time that I didn't want to talk about it. I remember yelling at my brother for suggesting that I spend more time with the family. And I remember going to the hospital just once to visit my mom. At the hospital, I called her a damn fool. Life progressed, as it does, and both my parents eventually remarried. Most of us seemed happy enough, but we still didn't talk much about the events of 2008. And though I saw her about as frequently over the years as most sons see their mothers, my conversations with my mom always seemed superficial. We talked mostly about work. Nearly 8 years passed before we had a real conversation. When I first realized that I was experiencing symptoms of depression, I was angry and scared. Having spent most of my young adult life ignoring the nuanced dangers of mental illness, the idea that I may be depressed was an unwelcome thought. I refused to acknowledge it for a long while, but the feelings were painful. Even my good days were clouded by the thought that at some point I would fall into the darkness again. I tried to will myself toward happiness and positive thinking, but it did not happen. I began to realize that I had to get help. I could not overcome this on my own. One day, Over dinner at Bob Evans, I told my mom how I felt. What followed was one of the most earnest, loving, and informative conversations I have ever experienced. My mother told me about her struggles and offered advice. She also suggested that I explain my symptoms to a doctor. Talking to my mom about my mental condition opened doors that had been locked for many years. We had a real conversation. I realized then that talking is an important part of treatment. Talking about thoughts and feelings lifts the veil on individual suffering and opens the eyes of caregivers. Talking helps remove stubborn stigmas and draws the attentions of those, like my younger self, who choose to ignore the often quiet struggles of those around them. Talking lifts emotional weights from our shoulders and reminds us that we are not alone. Talking about the right things, important things, things that impact us mentally and emotionally can change lives. Talking gave me back my mom. When my mom and I were finished talking at Bob Evans, we made plans to meet again soon. I hugged my mom hard, told her I loved her, and then got back in my car to drive back to Valparaiso. I wanted to stay longer, but I'm a teacher, and I would have a classroom full of students in the morning. After all, Tuesday is a weeknight, and I had a long week ahead of me. Thank you.